Thanks for taking the time to join us today for another training. It is always good to learn from the vast research and knowledge Dana has to share. Let's join Dana in progress.
We dropped off was right just kind of at the anatomy of the little fine beginning of the lymphatic system. So we've got some good graphics here to kind of help you understand that. So let's get right down to what is called the pre-collectors of the lymphatic system. Now, this system, guys, I tell you what, as we go through it, I'm going to constantly refer back to things that we've already talked about multiple times because it's so important that you hear it more than once. So as we throw this spaghetti on the wall, it's going to stick. It's just that important, okay? So your lymphatic system, you have your superficial lymphatic capillaries, and they're just barely under the surface of your skin, just barely underneath the epidermis. Very close to the surface, and that's good because they have to collect the fluid that leaks into the interstitial space, and that's their purpose. And this is the beginning. It's like a one-way cul-de-sac. It goes from the surface down deeper into the collectors, and then down into the vessels, and onto the lymph nodes, and into the lymphatic trunk, and into the thoracic ducts. So it's just quite an interesting pathway. And so when you're looking at these capillaries, they're small. There's 1 to 3 lymph capillaries per capillary. So you can see they're just little tiny guys. And if we get up here with the pen, you can see the venous system, artery and venous system there. And then this is what supplies the nutrients to all these cells. And all through the body, you have these little, and this is quite a large drawing here, but you can kind of see it in the cutout picture. See, there's the skin, just barely underneath, and they just go right up between the cells, just like that. There's a bunch of them, okay? And they just go up, and that's what collects all this excess fluid that's feeding and nourishing the cells, and then the cells are giving off waste, and they're collecting it and sending it on down the trunk in a one-way direction. And you can see in this picture these little, what they call filaments. We're going to talk about them in a little bit too. These are anchoring filaments that help to open the gates of the pre-collectors, okay? So it's a single layer epithelial cell. There's the anchoring filaments we talked about, and to collect the interstitial fluid and to take care of the lymph load. Now the fluid that's cycling or circulating around the cells is not called lymph until it gets into this vessel. Oh. And then they call it lymph. When it's out here, it's just called interstitium or inner milieu or interstitial fluid. They have multiple names for it. I like calling it just the interstitial fluid. But once it goes in, then it becomes lymphatic fluid. So as the vessels grow and go further down, you increase the fluid in the interstitial space. It expands this tissue space. It pulls on the anchoring filaments. It opens initial lymph capillaries, and it creates suction effect. There is really no pump when we talk about no active pump, I should say, on the lymphatic system. And it's built to handle large molecules. Now, remember that it's built to handle large molecules. That is the kind of the key here. So once we get going down the pathways, as you can see here in this here diagram, here's where the one-way cul-de-sac is, and the flow is heading down, going to the main trunk, and then that's going to get into your bigger capillaries until it gets to your lymph nodes, where all of the debris and waste that's being picked up here, loose connective tissue is going to get into the capillary. Some cells that have gone through apoptosis and died, so there's going to be cell debris. There's going to be lymphocytes, eosinophils, so see the lymphocytes. That's what they're picking up here to try to take in and take care of. And once it gets lymph node, that's where a lot of that stuff is purified. So I want to look again at these here, these anchoring filaments and these open junctions. And you can kind of see in this diagram, and the reason I wanted to show it is you can see there's quite a period there where there is no valve. It's just coming into this here collector, this pre-collector. Now, once it gets past this first valve, now we have a whole kind of cool thing setting up over here where we'll actually have little areas where there's an actual smooth muscle that will help in the pumping of the lymphatic fluid back to the heart. But in the beginning, there is absolutely no pump
back
there.
To the heart?
Yep, let's go back to the heart. Yeah. So that's, as you can see, it's an epithelial cell. That's all this is, just a single cell. That's all these are. And they have the little breaks there and those filaments by pulling. And that's what I was talking about last week. When we get in there and we start doing that real deep, hard tissue massage, those little filaments break right off. In fact, let me show you here. Oh, it's down a ways. Well, we'll come back to it. So these little pre-collective pathways are quite small, like this, 0.1 to 0.10 microns. They're just little tiny fingers that just go up in there to collect all this stuff.
But they're not blood capillaries.
No, they're not capillaries. They are an endothelial cell, just a single cell. That's all they are. And they create a canal.
Okay.
Okay. So these tissue canals increase in number and diameter as they move on down, especially if there's a lot of edema, they get really big. And that's what happens when you get the very close veins on your legs, is they literally get so big that those one-way valves can't close. So now you got all this swelling and stuff, not only in the lymph canal, but in the interstitial area. Okay. So they're kind of an unorganized structure pathway in the very beginning. They just kind of go all over the place, trying to collect everything they can. And you'll see in a little bit why it's so important. So now, once we get to the initial lymph collectors, this is transporting the lymph from those regions to the lymph nodes and the lymphatic trunk. And there's a valve about every 6 to 20 millimeters. So you'll have a valve. It's the valves are a little further apart because now we've already collected in the pre-collectors. Now we got it into the collectors, and we don't need a valves quite as often to get the fluid in there. So these are well-developed one-way valves they have in here. They're what we call a bicuspid valve. And there's a little smooth muscle right here. See the dilation it says? There's a little smooth muscle around this piece. And I have a better picture further on that you'll see, because I bring this back again so you can really understand it. And this little smooth muscle will contract. And when it contracts, it squirts that way. And when it squirts, the valve opens. And then when this one contracts, it goes to the outside here and pushes against the outside and closes this valve, so it has no choice but to go that way. So it's a cool, it's kind of like they did this over in Africa. They had a flapper on top of a pipe like this, and they just sit there and go like this, up and down. When they push down, the water would shove up. When they came up, the valve would close, and then they push down. They could pump water 70 feet in the air. And that's exactly the same concept of what this is.
But these are lymphatic pathways or vessels,
Right.
not blood vessels.
Right. They're not arteries and they're not veins. They're the secondary circulatory system. Okay. So like tributaries trickling into a small stream that feeds the river, lymphatic capillaries join with others and flow into larger vessels called pre-collectors to collectors. So they're just like a tributary to a large river. And this is a really good picture here. As you can see how that just comes up there, and as this contracts, it'll shove it through here. And if this one contracts, it's going to push it back against the outside, closing the valve. It has no choice. It'll go this way every time. Now, when you get edema, this here little collector gets too big, and that valve just sitting there like this. It can't close.
Oh.
And that's where you get the very close veins. Okay, now, so these here collectors, these lymph angions, they are denser and more smooth, muscular.
That's where you get varicose veins, but those are blood veins, not lymph veins.
Yes, because what's happening
Do you understand my confusion?
Here's what's happening is this here can't pull the lymph out of there. And so now your blood veins are getting over engorged because it's trying to have all this stuff pushed back somewhere. It's got to be retaken back. And so your blood veins get overloaded and the lymph get overloaded. So both systems are failing.
Okay.
Both systems are failing. Okay. So this is an autonomic contraction. So this little muscle here that I was telling you about that contracts, it has 10 to 12 beats per minute. That's it. It doesn't beat the same as your heart. And so it's just so you're figuring about every 10 seconds you'll get a
So
pump.
when you say something's going back to the heart, the lymph, that's going back to the heart?
It has to. If it didn't, you'd die.
I know, but what does the heart do with it?
Pumps it back out.
But you just said that the pump action, I think I'm stupid right now.
No, you're good.
That the pump action comes from these smooth cell things, not from the heart.
Yep, exactly. Heart is a one-way pump. All it does is pump it out. And remember last week we had higher pressure on the capillary and lower pressure on the venous side of the capillary.
Oh, okay.
And that's where these here proteins and things get out of the capillary. Well, all that has to be recaptured and taken back to the heart.
So it gets into the venous system, the heart venous system.
The heart brings it through the arteries down to the capillary because it's a high pressure there. As it passes from the capillary to the venous system, it leaks out. And that is what we have to recapture and take back to the heart. Now it'll go through the lymph nodes, it'll go through all the clean part. Then it goes into the liver, gets finalized, cleaned there.
But it ends up being blood back to the heart.
Yep. What we're talking about is trapped blood proteins.
I hope some of you are got the same confusion.
No, you're good. So normal conditions, lymph system transport 2 to 4 liters a day. It has up to 60 contractions a minute and 2 to 4 liters an hour and up to 20 liters a day. Okay, so think about that. 20 liters of this protein. These are the protein molecules in your blood.
Dana, we couldn't hear the last sentence.
Yeah, it went silent on us, Dana.
There, someone muted me.
You're back. You're back.
So what I was saying, let's go back to this slide right here. 60 liters a day is what is returned back to the artery system, the heart. Now it has to go through and be purified and everything, of course.
20 liters a day.
20 liters a day. So what do you think would happen if you did not return 20 liters back?
I would think you would die.
You would die. 24 to 48 hours, you die. Flat out. I mean, not a question. You're just dead.
So this lymph system is as important as the liver and the heart and everything else.
If it fails, you die.
Okay.
If it fails, you lose a limb. We're going to talk about that. Okay, so lymph node function. Now we've gone from the pre-collectors to the collectors. Now we're going to the lymph nodes. Very, very important here, guys. The lymph node function is a reabsorption, so you're going to get some reabsorption here. Blood capillaries and lymph nodes help with the reabsorption. Large portions of the excess water is taken care of there. But here is the thing that's so important about the lymph nodes. Here is your immune response. This is where, guys, if your lymph system's down, you're in major trouble with your immune system. Because here you have areas in the lymph node that are controlled with the T cells, the B cells, the dendritic cells, and the macrophages. This is where that lymph comes up and gets purified, is in the lymph nodes. So when you have swollen lymph nodes, what's it telling you? It's telling you that your lymph nodes are overworking, purifying all the garbage that's going on in your life. And so very important. So here's where you get the signaling of antibodies to leave the lymph node and circulate through the blood to signal cell death for pathogens. So your lymph nodes are so important. So when a doctor comes in, and sometimes they have to do this, I'm not trying to bash a doctor, but sometimes they have to come in because they have cancerous lymph nodes and they have to take them out. Now we've got a problem because now we've compromised the immune system, one, and now we don't have a way for that lymph to move. And now we have this lymphedema and all this swelling going on and all kinds of rough stuff. And so we've got to learn how to retrain it to a different pathway. And we can do that. And we'll talk about that later too. So this is the filtering system, the beginning of the filtering system of the lymphatic system. So let's just go ahead and hopefully this will play. There it is. Watch this video.
In 1960, Sir Frank McFarlane Burnett was awarded the Nobel Prize for his contribution to the field of immunology. Burnett's clonal selection theory revolutionized our understanding of the immune system. To this day, Burnett's research remains the foundation of the way we think about disease and how the body responds to it. Clonal selection is the central mechanism by which your body fights infection. The following visualization presents clonal selection during an infection by strep throat bacteria. strep bacterial infection, which is a red cell plastic. Tiny round strep bacteria rise. Bacteria are protein pairs, M protein. M protein is what your body recognizes from response. Your body performs the immune attack. Your lymphatic network is an important part of the immune system, detecting any infections that arise in the body. The M protein pairs range into the lymphatic system around this patient's neck. The lymph node is crammed full of B cells. These cells are guardians of your immune system, scanning the body for foreign bacteria. Arriving at the lymph node are M protein pairs from the bacteria. Your body contains billions of B cells. Each B cell is unique and is sensitive to only one kind of foreign infection. By chance, one B cell is sensitive to the M protein pairs from the bacteria. This is the molecular surface of that B cell, magnified 10 million times. Its surface is covered with receptors that recognize M protein. The receptors grab onto the M protein pair. This triggers an activation signal to travel into the cell. The activated B cell migrates and begins to replicate. In a few days, thousands of copies of the selected cell are made. This is the central idea in Burnett's clonal selection theory, where one cell is selected out of billions of B cells and identical clones have been created from it. Therefore, the cell is cloned.
Okay, I'm going to pause right here because Sherry said you can't hear this too well. So what was going on here is you saw the infection, strep throat in the guy's throat here. There are little, and you saw how there are little hair cells on the bacteria that literally got to the lymph node. The lymph node then takes those hair cells and activates the billions of different memory cells, B cells there. One was actually already selected because you've had strep throat before, matched up with the hair cells, and now is this cluster is creating billions of antibodies to go out and kill the strep throat. So that's how important it is that the lymphatic system stays good and solid and functioning, because if you don't, you literally have a collapse of your immune system. And that's why those that have really strong immune systems were resistant to COVID. Those that didn't or had something happen that compromised their immune system, they got it instantly. So that your immune system is absolutely imperative, and your lymphatic system is such a big role of that. So we'll just go forward here a little bit and we'll finish explaining it.
This creates an army of B cells that mass produce M protein antibodies and release them into the surrounding fluid. The antibodies circulate in the blood and travel into tissues. They bind to the M protein pairs on the strep bacteria. This flags them for destruction by the immune system. Other immune cells ingest the antibody-covered bacteria. They destroy the bacteria and eliminate the infection.
Okay, I had to grab the mic and run all the way up to the presentation screen to get that to sound better. So that gives you an idea how important this lymphatic system is to your immune system. And I think, if I remember right, let's go back here. Okay, yeah. All right, so let's take a look at these lymph nodules here. Your body has an average of over 600 of these bean-shaped nodules in your body. You can kind of see where they are located here. So very, very important. This is what's going to be cleaning up and taking care of all the different bacteria, fungi, viruses that come into your body and work through your body. And they filter through and they destroy these foreign substances that come into the body, and germs and toxins that may be present. They are so, so important. So the lymphatic system does not have a single active pump like the heart. Okay, we talked about that. That contracts and goes forward and does that. It has multiple superficial systems divided into different regions and whatnot. They help drain these things and get them into the system. So let's just take a look at this video here and see how it plays.
The heart pumps blood throughout the body, and it pumps so powerfully that it actually squeezes some fluid out of the capillaries. And that fluid becomes lymph. And it's the lymphatic system that gathers all that fluid and brings it back into circulation. But this idea might bother you. You might have an objection, which is these lymph vessels don't have a heart of their own. I didn't draw one because they don't have one. So how is it that they're able to pump this fluid in one direction? And moreover, how is it that they're able to pump it back into this high pressure system, given that they don't have a pump? That must be quite difficult. There are two answers to this question, really. And the first is a little simpler, so let's start there. The first answer is essentially in the location of three entries. So the reason why lymph is able to get back into the high pressure system is because lymph is quite intelligent about where it tries to re-enter the high pressure system. So I'm drawing a star here because that's where the lymph re-enters. I didn't draw that by accident. It re-enters at the very end of the venous circulation system. And the pressure there is much lower than the pressure in the arteries and even the pressure in the capillaries. The numbers are actually pretty striking. The pressure here in the early arteries can be about 120 millimeters of mercury. That's kind of like your average blood pressure. But over here, just before it enters the heart, the pressure is more like 5 millimeters of mercury. So the fact that the lymph fluid enters circulation at the end here makes it much easier. It has to fight against much less. If the lymph vessel ends up trying to drain a ear, let's say into the aorta or to a big artery, probably none of this would work. So that makes the job easier, but it doesn't explain how the lymph moves sort of one directionally into the blood vessels. What is actually forcing the lymph? What is getting it to move in this direction? Why wouldn't it just come back as much as it would go forward? And the reason why that's not the case is because of valves. So valves are structures within the lymph vessels which prevent fluid from going back. So let's draw a lymph vessel here. And a valve might look something like this. And what this valve accomplishes is that if fluid gets pushed that way, it'll part the two leaves of the valve and it'll get through. But let's say that fluid tried to come back. When it tries to come back, it'll push the valves back, the leaves of the valve back together, and it'll create an obstacle. Now, this is a really smart system, and actually, it's not only used in your lymph vessels. You might know that it's also used actually in the heart. You have 4 big valves in the heart that operate on this exact principle. And it's also used in veins because the pressure to push fluid through veins is sometimes not sufficient. And so having a mechanism to prevent backward flow is very helpful. But still, you might not be satisfied because you might say, well, what causes the lymph to move at all here? Why wouldn't it just sit where it is? And there are actually 2 ways that the motion begins. One is that you actually have a little bit of smooth muscle attached to your lymphatic vessels, and that can contract. And just by squeezing, it'll cause motion of the fluid forwards. So that's the first mechanism by which the motion starts. And the second is skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle just refers to basically all the big muscles in your body that are under voluntary control. Think about your leg muscles, your arm muscles, and so on. And the reason why this does something is that just throughout the course of your average day, you use your muscles, you move around, you have a certain amount of jostling in your body. And so it's inevitable that you're going to squeeze certain parts of your body at some time. And when you squeeze a part of the body that has a lymph vessel like this, it's going to start the motion. It's going to squeeze it just like the smooth muscle did. And you'll get fluid moving ahead in the direction that the valves allow them to. And so in addition to the valves, which we can draw in to our diagram here, in addition to those, there's an interesting contraption where the lymph first enters the lymphatic vessels. So I drew it here as an open tube, but in reality, it's closed. At least it looks closed, but it's porous, of course, and that's what allows fluid to get in. Let me just draw this a little bigger. But basically, this is where the lymph vessel starts, and the walls of this lymph vessel are kind of like valves in and of themselves, in that they allow fluid to come in, but when the pressure inside rises, it prevents fluid from going out. So the lymph cannot go back out. So finally, let's just look at a human body to get a sense of where everything that we're doing fits in. So here's another ugly human. Let's quickly give him some arms, a head. And now we can actually show where the lymph re-enters circulation. So let's say that that's the heart. Well, you probably know that one of the huge veins leading into the heart is the superior vena cava. And right near the superior vena cava, you have what are called the subclavian veins. And you have one on the right and one on the left. They're called subclavian veins because they pass just under the clavicle. And it's actually right into these that the lymph is re-entered. So I'm drawing that in green so that it corresponds with that. It's at this point that we have very low pressure, and it's there that all the lymph from the body goes. So that includes lymph from down in your legs, and from your arms, and from your neck, and so on. And it's pretty remarkable if you think about it, that all the lymph in your body traveled up this entire path and got dumped back into circulation there. And all of it was without an active pump. It was all done through this method of a little bit of squeezing with smooth muscle, but mostly just the ingenuity of these one-way valves that take advantage of the fact that you're always moving around to sort of squirt the lymph back up all the way up your body to essentially your neck.
Okay. That kind of explains that pretty good, doesn't it? Oh,
You're good.
all right. So that's kind of cool when you look at that, Steve. And he did a really good job describing that all the way through. So now you can kind of put the whole picture together and see how that works. And that's what's important when you get the whole picture of the entire system. Now, here's what's so fun about all this. You take someone that's been injured. Let's take your friend Jim, who injured his foot. When you're injured, what happens to your activity? Lessens. What happens when you're sick?
Lessens.
You lay in bed and you're sick. What happens to the flow of everything?
Slows down.
Are you going to heal as quick?
No.
Yeah. So there's things that we need to do to activate that lymphatic system so that we can continue to move forward. All right, so let's see. So now that we've done all that, let's just take a good look at the picture here again. And you can see all the inguinal lymph nodes there in the growing area, armpits, neck, and head. Now, here's some new research, Steve. 2 years ago, when I did this presentation 8 years ago, this was unknown. So this is just only 2 years old. The brain now has a lymphatic system. They didn't know that before. Can't hear me? Oh,
Not very good, she said. Can you turn it up?
yeah. Try that now. Can you hear me better now? Clara, okay. Clara gave me a thumbs up. Okay. So did you hear what I was saying about the brain?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So the brain has a complete lymphatic system, and that is re-entered at the same place. Isn't that crazy? They didn't even know up to 2 years the brain had. It makes sense. It totally makes sense. But they said, no, that can't be because of the blood-brain barrier. But it has to have that to clean it all out. So it's absolutely cool. So if you take a look here, we're gonna go into this here, talking about how lymph moves, stuff like that. If this gets a little redundant, I'll just pass through it. So maybe this will play.
42.
Okay. Well, we'll pass through that. Let's see. Okay. Now, we talked about this last week. Traditional treatment for edema in tissue is diuretics, and that's for just regular edema, and then for lymphedema, also diuretics. And so see what's going on here? Inflammatory response. There's your very close veins. Dilation of capillaries, neutrophils, macrophages, all this is what's going on. So it's a collapse of both systems, and that's what you get the creation there, okay? So now here's the key, guys. Here's the key. The distance, diffusion distance. The distance from cell to cell nearest in the capillary in order to survive. They cannot be any further apart than 40 to 200 UMs. That's
Micrometers.
That's micrometers, just teeny. So what is a micrometer? We'll take a look here. 0.1, they said right here, if inflammation increases by 0.2 millimeters, the diffusion distance is increased by 100% and cell death will start to occur.
Wow.
So what is 2 millimeters? A hair is 0.1 millimeter. So 2 hair thicknesses, you cause cell death. So now let's go back to your friend Jim, our friend Jim. His foot, he had inflammation. Do you think it was more than 2 hairs wide? Do you think we had cell death in that foot?
Yeah.
Absolutely we did. When this foot started to regenerate and we started doing the stuff we did, was he in pain? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why? Because we had to get those old dead cells out there through a lymphatic system that is in a collapsed situation so new cells can grow. And it's very, very painful as we go through that. And so this is why it's so important to understand the lymphatic system. This one here is really important to understand.
Inflammation is the body's protective response against infections or injuries. Inflammation mobilizes defensive cells to the site of injury, limits the spread of pathogens, eliminates them, and initiates tissue repair. Inflammation can occur in any organ, but is most common and also most easily observable in the skin and underlying tissues. Typical signs include redness, heat, swelling, and pain. Inflammation is an important defense mechanism, but it can be a double-edged sword when things go wrong. An autoimmune disease may result when inflammation targets and destroys the body's own cells. An acute inflammation that fails to stop after the original insult is cleared can become chronic and damaging to healthy tissues. Acute inflammation is initiated when tissue-resident immune cells, such as macrophages, encounter an inflammatory stimulus. This stimulus can be a pathogen, a toxin, or an injured host cell. Binding of the stimulus to its receptor on the immune cell triggers a signaling cascade that activates production of cytokines and other inflammatory mediators. Inflammatory chemicals dilate blood vessels, increasing blood flow and enhancing vessel permeability, allowing plasma fluid and more immune cells to seep through and accumulate in the inflamed tissue. This vasodilation is responsible for clinical signs of inflammation such as redness, heat, and swelling. The infiltration of blood components into the injured tissue occurs in 3 phases. The first phase is the exudation of plasma fluid containing various antimicrobial mediators, platelets, and blood clotting factors. These factors can destroy microbes and stop any bleeding that may have occurred. The second phase is the infiltration of neutrophils, the major phagocytes involved in first-line defense. Once activated by inflammatory mediators, endothelial cells of blood vessels become adhesive. They attach to neutrophils in blood flow, slowing them down before getting them to squeeze through the vessel wall. Chemical cues guide neutrophils to the battlefield, where they engulf bacteria and destroy them with enzymes or toxic peroxides. Neutrophils may also release highly reactive oxygen species in a phenomenon known as oxidative burst, which kills pathogens faster and more efficiently. The pathogen-laden neutrophils then die via apoptosis. In the third phase arrive monocytes. Monocytes differentiate into macrophages, which then remove pathogens, injured cells, and dying neutrophils by phagocytosis. Macrophages that have completed their mission are cleared from the tissue by the lymphatic system. Accumulation of fluid increases pressure on lymphatic capillaries, forcing open their one-way valves, facilitating lymphatic drainage. Lymph-containing debris-laden macrophages passes through a number of lymph nodes and is filtered clean before it returns to the bloodstream. Once the site is cleared from the original insult, immune cells stop producing pro-inflammatory chemicals and instead start producing anti-inflammatory mediators, which actively drive the termination of inflammation. Many of these anti-inflammatory molecules are lipids, some of which are synthesized from dietary omega-3 fatty acids. This step is essential in ensuring the favorable outcome of inflammation. Failure to resolve inflammation leads to development of chronic inflammation, which continuously deals damage to healthy tissues. Chronic inflammation is a known contributing factor to pathogenesis of a wide variety of conditions, including cardiovascular diseases, asthma, diabetes, arthritis, and even cancer.
Okay, now that picture right there, guys, that you're seeing, I want you to look at that. Look at how far apart those cells are. When that inflammatory response is going on, it's more than 2.2 microns between them, and they can't get the oxygen, they can't get the nutrients, and those cells die. Now we have literally, you're dying within. And the only way, as you saw in the video, the only way to pick that back up,
So if they get into the lymphatic
go into the lymphatic system. That's what we call trapped blood proteins. And when you have too much trapped blood proteins, you die.
Inflammation.
All right, so let's see. This is very important, guys. Look at how this system reacts with your body. It helps to maintain the fluid balance within the cardiovascular system. It aids in fat absorption and digestive system and plays a major role in the body's immune and defense system. So the lymphatic system is literally connected to three systems in a very powerful way. Let's see, there's the internal milieu. We've talked about that, so we'll go on because we're running out of time. There's no way I could even gotten close to getting through all this. All right, part of the balance. This is kind of important, guys, because through this, because it plays so well with the circulatory system and the cardiovascular system, this is where you're getting the oxygen and nutrients to every single cell in your body. It has to come out of the arteries. It has to get to the interstitium, to get to every single cell. If it doesn't get to that internal milieu, how are you feeding the cells throughout your body? It has to come out and carry it over to the cells and take care of it. Then what is out there needs to be recaptured. So as the blood passes through the capillary vessels, water and nutrients passes continuously in the space between and around the cells known as the interstitial space. That's so important to understand that this here, literally, if you're not cleaning it up, you're a walking cesspool. And when that happens, then you just cycle through every disease that comes down the pike, okay? So the interstitial space acts as a reservoir to which the cells can absorb what they need from the surrounding fluids. The tissue cells also excrete waste matter and excess fluid back into that interstitial space. And there might be antigens and pathogens and all kinds of stuff that's coming back into that. And the lymphatic system is fine-tuned drainage system that literally takes this here fluid, this overflow fluid and water and trapped proteins, and it takes it out there, purifies it, and gets it back into the system. So once again, now you can kind of see the rhythm of how these pre-collectors work and go right on through. And it's a very slow, rhythmic, low pressure system that is constantly working day and night to try to keep your body filtered, clean, and pure. Now, this is what I'm talking about. They did an actual study on a dog. The dog was injured and had a complete blockage just in his leg, and the dog died in 2 weeks. Just one leg being blocked. The dog wound up with what they call auto intoxication, and the entire organism passed away. It wasn't just the leg that died, the whole body passed away. So guys, this is not something you just, there it is right there, auto intoxication, and died in 24 to 48 hours. Guys, it's so important to realize this lymphatic system is not talked about, it is not taught, it is not understood, and it is one of the most important parts of our health, and we're just not really understanding it. So let's see, we've covered that enough. We can go past that.
And you can all read this later.
Right, you can all read it later. This is part of the digestive system because it's connected there to help with fat metabolism. Now, the composition of the lymph. This is so important, guys, because once we understand this, it's going to work out well for the formula. So the lymph usually is clear or transports a yellow alkalinic type liquid. So a lot of times they call it milk. The lymph has been referred to as milk, and you'll see why in a little bit. But if you look here, 94% of it is H2O, water, 6% solid, and then you have cells in there. You have lymphocytes, plasma cells, electrolytes, and some other plasma, urea, creatine, amino acids, phosphorus, chloride, glucose, clotting factors. There's all kinds of stuff in there. So that's actual lymph fluid right there. That's why they call it milk. They actually call it the milk vein. It's actually the scientific name, or the common name is child. That's the vessel there. So milk vein. Okay. So let's look at it again. Another kind of look: water, proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, enzymes, urea, minerals, and hormones. Some dissolved gases like carbon dioxide, cells like lymphocytes, macrophages, toxins, bacteria, body waste, bits of cell debris, etc. That's what's in the lymph fluids. So you can see, if you look at that first, you go, whoa, this side's okay because we got the water, proteins, and lipids and carbohydrates. Over here, we got toxins and bacteria and body waste. It kind of grosses you out a little bit. But guys, that's why it's so important to understand what this is and how we take care of it. So looking at the water load, again, your body, your blood plasma is 96% water. The plasma is just over 90% water. The cerebral fluid is 98.5% water. So you kind of see there's quite a heavy water load in the body, and because they have to move this around through every cell so that it can get fed. And so here are some of the minerals that you're going to find in the plasma that's going into the interstitium: sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, zinc, copper. Those are all the colloidal minerals that you're going to find that's going to flow around because it's needed for every cell to feed it, take care of it, nourish it so it can replicate itself. There's going to be a protein load. This protein load is what is really the key here, guys. You have between 10 to 60 grams per liter of different proteins: the albumin, the alpha, beta, and gamma globulins, and immunoglobulins, and the furogens, and etc. Okay, so let's see. Those proteins are going to escape into the interstitium, and they can only be recovered because they're too big, only by the lymphatic circulatory system. That's the only way. If they're not recovered, you're going to have massive swelling, auto intoxication, and ultimately death will occur. That's what's so important. So when you get injured, like when Jim had that fall on his foot, injured that foot, this is exactly what's going on. Those trapped blood proteins came out, and they were not getting back because cell death ensued, and circulation shut down, and he was in trouble. Okay. So these accumulated extracellular compartments that's going on there, it happens because of insufficient activity. Well, he couldn't get around. Foot was kind of hammered. Okay. Poor oxygen because we're not moving around. You're being more sedentary. Diet can add to it. Excess toxicity can add to it. Stress, cold, aging, and medications. Guys, we're going to talk about stress a little later here. Stress is absolutely a killer to your lymphatic system. This is just more about lipids and the proteins that go into there. And if you get these undigested proteins in the lymphatic system, you wind up also with an allergy. You wind up with a food allergy later in life, undigested food proteins into the interstitium. Wow. And that can happen through the lymphatic system, or it can happen through leaky gut syndrome that gets into the interstitium, okay? Cells, we talked about the different cells that are going to be in there that have to be cleaned up and taken out. Here's some of the other things you will find in the lymph fluid. Dead cells, migratory cells such as cancer, mutant cells such as precancer, and so on and so forth. Microscopic cell fragments, debris, DNA fragments, cells which experience apoptosis, and they're just kind of suicidal death, and they're just kind of floating around bits and pieces here and there. Foreign waste cells, invading microbes, in case of inflammation cells, different tissue comes in the lymph system. So as Jim's foot was decaying and falling apart, we had pieces of tissue that was trying to be recovered by the lymph system, including mast cells and eosinophils, granulites, platelets. It's unbelievable what is all in that lymph system that has to clean it all up so they can get back and be back in the body. Here's some more. I mean, just, guy, did you ever have an idea there's all that in there?
No.
No. Isn't this something?
I didn't have any idea that it was so important.
Oh, it's just, look, hormones, very important. Hormones are going to be this, your sexual function and neuropeptides. You get over here to your hyaluronic acid. If that's not, you got all kinds of problems if that's not in place, or too much in place. Too much and too little. Fibrogen, we can go on. Okay, so let's go on. Body fluids. It also helps to maintain your pH. And if you're, we don't have time to talk about it tonight, but if there's two different ways, you'll either go very acidic or you can go very basic, depending on what's going on with your lymphatic system. Watersheds. Now, the watersheds are very important. This is where someone loses a breast from cancer or whatnot, and they take out all the lymph nodes. You have to understand where the watersheds are. So basically, the body is divided right down the center, and then right here at the waist. Then there's another divide up here that's not shown. That actually is right below the clavicles where the subclavial veins re-enter. And then I'll show you the ones on the face. And so if a breast is removed and these here lymph nodes are gone, we need to retrain this watershed, because here's where it's going to go in. So we need to train this watershed, and really it's too hard to take it clear across because it's a totally different system. So we have to bring it down or around the back to get it to come back over in. So different watersheds in different places. So there's just diagrams showing how it all circulates. Now here's a lymph drainage map, and you can kind of see how it drains from the face down into the clavicle nodes, and then into there's where you're going to go return back into the system. So you normally would work it to the armpit, but the breast gone, you'd try to work it back into here or take it on around to the back, bring these up. You can kind of see how they drain. This is really important. Okay, so now here is the cool thing. Organization of the lymphatic system, your pre-lymphatic pathways, no valves, no muscular unit. Lymphatic capillaries, no valve, no muscular unit. Pre-collectors, yes, they have a valve, and yes, they have a muscular unit. Collectors, yes, yes. Trunks and duct, yes, yes. So in that very beginning, it's just trying to get the fluid into the system, and then from there, that's why they sometimes use compression bandages, because there's more pressure inside the system than outside the system. They can't get it in. There's your active pump, so your muscular system that we talked about, and this is the one you can see here how it pushes it in. See how it slammed this tight closed, and this is going to push out here. That just there's compressed and there's relaxed. So it's kind of cool. Right through. Okay. So if you look at the diastolic pressure, it ranges between 0 and 1 mm's of mercury, and when it's actually in contraction, it's 3 to 5. So it's not a lot. It's just enough to make that happen. So here's a really great picture of it. This is what I wanted you to see. And these here, guys, they're very rhythmatic. They consist of 2 to 3 layers of a spiral smooth muscle. It's going to cause that contraction, shoving this through and closing this off with that valve. Okay. All right, passive lymph pump is going to be respiration. Guys, if you can't get up and walk around, you can't do exercise because you got a busted leg or whatever, breathing, deep breathing. This is your next pump. This movement of the diaphragm in the thoracic cage, it creates a negative pressure in the thoracic area, and you actually will create lymphatic flow. We are shallow breathers. Really, we are. Unless you're up hiking the mountain or something like that, we very, very rarely go fill the tank. And so very important, guys, we should be doing belly breathing. You inhale, the belly goes out, you push the belly in and shove it out. Now you're moving that whole system in and out, creating a passive pump. Just more information on, oh, here's something, guys, look at this. Laughter stimulates lymphatic drainage. Guys, just go tickle someone's foot, you know, just get them doing a deep belly laugh because it literally pumps, okay? Skeletal muscle contractions, peristalsis of the smooth muscle, the adjacent arteries also help as this being contracted, it'll help push there. So there's several different things. Swimming is excellent for lymphatic movement. If you can't go hiking, go swimming, because you have the pressure of the water pushing on your body, so it acts like a compression bandage, and then you're moving in the water and there's resistance there, so it creates all kinds of movement. All right, so let's see, we'll just go past that. Circulation, we talked about that. So in recapping, I don't know if we need to recap because I think I did a pretty good job on it, so it's there. All right, here's some of the partial list of the conditions that may improve when you start increasing your lymphatic flow. So these are the ones that are so important: arthritis, backache, asthma, breast cancer, cellulite, chronic fatigue, prostate enlargement, psoriasis, rheumatism, ringing of the ears. You can read the list. That's a lot of lists just by increasing your lymphatic flow. And guys, you want to increase your flow, grab your wife and go dancing. Okay. All right, now comes, oh boy, we're so far out of time. Yeah. All right. Here is the beginning understanding of how this system powers itself. And when this system collapses here, that's when death ensues. So energy production of the cells. We are electrical beings in search of a recharge. Our whole body runs on electricity. And if we don't get electricity, guess what? We start to die. What is cellular energy? Our body contains trillions of cells. Each of them have a huge number of tiny energy producing power plants called the mitochondria. The mitochondria converts the food that we eat and the air that we breathe into ATP. This is a special type of fuel that fuels a cell. We use ATP for everything. Your brain uses billions of AT molecules. Oria's giving you the numbers, like a trillion, just to do one thought. Yeah. It's crazy. So ATP is adenosine phosphate. Main energy source comes from glucose molecules, then glycolysis, and then the Krebs cycle, and then fermentation. I'm going to just bust through these because I know we had them in basic biology 100 years ago. So the Krebs cycle is also referred to as a citric acid cycle. So glycolysis, it takes one glucose to make two pyruvates. But to do that, we have to use two ATPs. So when we get done, we take two ATPs. So you're taking energy to make energy. So when you get done, you've made 4 ATPs. So you have a net gain of 2 ATPs. It's not a very good system when you're doing glucose and trying to turn it into energy. If you have oxygen available, then it'll go in the Krebs cycle. And that's when it takes the pyruvate here and really does a number on it. So here's the Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle. It takes the 2 pruvates and it takes 2 ATPs to do that. It makes 2 ATPs and carbon dioxide. Then it takes the electrons and adds them to a carrier molecule. And so it only makes 4 ATPs and makes 2 NAD electron carriers. So just in the very beginning of the Krebs cycle, it's not much better than the glucose cycle. But now when we move to what happens with these 2 NADs, here's where it gets exciting. This electron transport chain, when it does that, it moves the hydrogen ions from a lower concentration to a higher concentration. So it moves across the cell membrane and it binds it to that carrier molecule. It has to have it on that carrier molecule. And when it gets done, it creates 34 ATPs. 2 NAD electrons, so it replaces the 2 that's using to make the 34, and it kicks out carbon dioxide. So that's where you get the cellular energy, is from this process right here. It's absolutely amazing how it'll give you a net gain of 34 ATPs, because one mitochondria will produce 10 million ATPs every second. Every single second. And what is the byproduct of the Krebs cycle? Water. That's why when you're actually running the Krebs cycle correctly, you'll find you'll be running to the little boys' room or little girls' room quite often. Second energy producer is a sodium potassium pump. Guys, we just really need to see this real quick.
Active transport is a type of cell transport that requires the input of energy in the form of ATP. The proteins that conduct this form of transport are often called pumps because they force molecules or ions to move from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. This is commonly referred to as against the concentration gradient. One of the more common examples of active transport is the sodium-potassium pump. The job of the sodium-potassium pump is to move sodium ions, or Na+, out of the cell, and potassium ions, or K+, into the cell. Let's take a closer look at how this happens. The sodium-potassium pump has binding sites for 3 sodium and 2 potassium ions. Let's follow the movement of the sodium ions first. After 3 sodium ions are positioned within the carrier protein, an ATP molecule is split, releasing phosphate. This phosphate binds to a location on the exterior of the carrier protein, causing the protein to change shape. As the protein changes shape, the 3 sodium ions are released to the other side of the membrane. Next, 2 potassium ions position themselves within the carrier protein, causing it to undergo another change in shape. In the process, the phosphate molecule is released. Once the phosphate molecule is released, the carrier protein expels the potassium ions into the interior of the cell. The carrier then resumes its initial shape, completing the cell. Notice that for every 3 sodium ions leaving the cell,
Okay, it goes on and kind of does a little more explanation there, but we'll go ahead and go past that due to time.
It just keeps doing the same thing.
Just,
over and
yeah,
over.
come on. Come on. Oh, there we go. Okay. This is another really, this one's really good. I'm going to fast forward up here so you can see why it's so important. If it'll let me. Yeah.
They can't hear it.
Okay, here we go. Oops. All right. This is what I wanted you to see here, because each organ, your heart, your brain, and your kidneys use it different ways.
Diffusion is the movement of these types of solutes or ions down their concentration gradient. If you've got heaps of sodium outside, where does it want to go? It wants to go inside the cell. Now, luckily, we've got some proteins that help take this sodium and throw it inside the cell. What it does is it will throw 3 sodium back into the cell, and what it will do is it will exchange those 3 sodiums for a calcium ion. And so now what we've got is all this calcium building up outside the cell. Why is this important for heart muscle? Well, it's important because calcium is required for muscular contraction. When calcium is inside of a muscle cell, the muscle cell will contract. If we throw it outside the cell, the muscle cell will relax. This means establishing a bunch of sodium outside the cell means that when it jumps inside the cell, it can be exchanged for calcium and the heart muscle can relax. This is so important for allowing our heart muscle to take a break before its next contraction. You want a healthy, happy contraction of a heart? You need sodium, potassium, ATPase pumps. Okay, what about the brain? That's what I've drawn up here. It may not look like it. Why does the brain need the sodium, potassium, ATPase pump? Throwing that 3 sodium outside the cell, throwing the 2 potassium inside the cell. Well, what this actually establishes is a charge difference. If you've got 3 positive things outside and 2 positive things inside, it's a little bit more positive outside the cell than inside the cell. In addition to that, we've got some leaky channels here that allow for potassium to leak out. Now, if potassium starts to leak out a little bit, it makes it even more positively charged outside of our neurons, our brain cells, compared to inside. That means we've now established not just a chemical gradient from outside in, but we've also established an electrical gradient from outside in. It's this electrical chemical gradient that allows neurons to send signals. Why? Because we'll open up some sodium channels that are embedded in our neurons. This allows sodium to rush into the cell. Sodium's positive, takes the positive charge with it. That is the electrical signal we send through our neurons. Okay, why is the sodium potassium ATPase pump important for our kidneys? Well, it's important because when we take that sodium potassium ATPase pump, throwing 3 sodium outside the cell, chucking 2 potassium inside the cell, what we've now done is, again, establish the fact that the cells of our kidneys are nearly empty of sodium. That means when our blood filters sodium coming in to the kidneys, as they move through the tubes of the kidneys, it sees, hey, these cells have no sodium in them. I want to jump in, go down my chemical gradient. When they jump into the cells, they can then jump back out into the body. This is the way that our kidneys filter everything and then throw 99% of it back in because of the sodium potassium ATPase pump establishing a chemical gradient. This is just 3 examples of why the sodium potassium ATPase pump is important for you.
Okay, guys. What does that mean to the lymphatic system? If you look really quick here, the cells have to be in a dry state. That's why they're close together. They can't have that wide gap. There's your sodium potassium pump creating the energy. That's going to be your electrical charge, as well as your ATPs going on. When you get in a wet state, see how large this movement is here between the cells? Now you start to have disease and cell death and all kinds of problems going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to just jump through this and get to the trap proteins. Oh man, guys,
Just start next week.
I'll just start next week with this because it's so important to, let me just take it off share right now and just kind of explain to you why. We still have another close to 40 slides. We won't get through it for another half hour. This is why it's so important. And I know I spent a lot of time on this and showed some videos, and some of them were hard to hear. I had to actually go up with the mic and put it underneath the TV. But guys, here's why here's why it's so important. When we have this fluid flowing around our cells, we have to realize that in that fluid is oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, vitamins, minerals, hormones, everything is flowing around in that. And as it flows around in that, we have to recapture it back. And because all these things are in there, the glucose is pulled in to the mitochondria. It goes through the process of creating the ATP. So you get that energy there. You get the sodium potassium pump that creates the electrical gradient. And so as you saw in that video, the heart has a specific way it uses the sodium potassium pump. The brain has a specific way to create the electrical impulse. And even the cells have a way to create the different electrical impulses and energy for each cell. And when you stop the energy flow, the cell dies. And that can be from stopping the ATP, that can be stopping from the sodium potassium pump. And the key here, guys, is when sodium goes out of the cell, it attracts water. And that's why the kidneys are so effective in doing what they do. Because when the sodium goes in, it attracts water, the water comes in the kidneys, and it kicks the sodium back out. So now we have made the pump that works for that specific thing, getting that urea out of the body. And so it's very important to see that the whole thing works in such a rhythmic way. And what we're going to do next week is we're going to go in from there and we're going to talk about these trapped blood proteins, what they do, what they are, and how the formula actually comes out. And you'll literally see a diagram of the formula. If this happens, this is going to happen. And if these two things happen, this will happen. If you want to reverse disease, you do this, 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 and that's going to reverse the disease because we're working with this, with a very rhythmatic system. And then from there, what we'll do on the latter part of next week is we're going to go in and we're going to give you the how. What tools do you need to move stuff? What tools you need to maintain stuff? What tools do you need and can use to fix stuff? And so that's how we'll work this out. Wow, there was a lot of information there tonight. I'm sorry, guys. I get on the computer and just start creating, and it gets crazy. I'm sorry.
Well, Dan, don't say you're sorry, because we're not.
Look how long it is.
I know, but everybody's still here.
I agree. Never say you're sorry because we're grateful for all you have taught us.
Without a doubt.
Well, Dana, thank you. We're gonna let you go, folks.
For more information, get back with the person who sent you this amazing gift.